Personal finance expert, MeVest founder Lesley-Anne joining us on Canada Now. And Lesley-Anne, a recent article of yours in The Star discusses the season of financial self-sabotage.
Such an interesting concept. I actually tested this with my student community to ask them if they felt like they had fallen victim to financial self-sabotage during the holidays. Now, let me paint this picture for you. It kind of looks a little something like this. I'm just going to put a few more items in my cart. It won't hurt. Great. Wow, my cart is much bigger than I thought. But at the checkout, there's that little buy now, pay later button. I'm going to hit that. Gosh, I deserve this. I wish my parents could see me now. You can see this self-talk going on. And before this person knows it, what they've done is filled up their cart with things that they can't really afford. They've hit the buy now, pay later button, which is a form of debt. They've woven into that their parents, right? Like, because they're now feeling guilt about themselves. Then they're justifying the purchase. And what happens with financial self-sabotage, which is actually at its peak during this time of year, is the person ends up really overdoing it. So their next step could actually be a television. It could be a car. There is no shut-off valve. Have you heard about this before?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And
Yes.
you mentioned parents, and you talk about it in the piece, two things that can have a massive impact on their financial state of mind: your upbringing and who your partner is.
Absolutely. And you think of like your upbringing, and I'll be really specific here about my own. When we were growing up, we did not have two nickels to rub together. It's because both my parents went back to school. We were really living actually below the low income line. And so I have a sensitive issue around when our fridge is ever at a low point. It's because I grew up with this. When the fridge went low, it always made our whole family really anxious. And at times we weren't sure where the food was going to come from. And so even today, when I see our fridge get low, it has an impact on me. It actually still makes me sad. Here's the thing about triggers. What I just described as a trigger, and triggers are often linked, financial triggers are often linked to your upbringing. Now, here's where the partner fits in. The partner comes into the scene and you decide to get hitched, or whatever the style of your relationship is, and they have triggers. And they have their way of approaching saving and spending, and it begins to pull you in a direction of their upbringing and how their upbringing is impacting their financial future. Such a strange contribution to financial self-sabotage, but it plays out like this. If you have threads from your childhood that have not been properly dealt with, and they're affecting your finances, they have the potential to either sink your ship financially or help it float in a new and different direction. I think what I'm trying to get at is these triggers have to be managed.
Well, and that trigger that you have about seeing the fridge and there's less food in the fridge than you would like, do you overcompensate now? I don't think you do, based on knowing who you are. But
No.
you don't overcompensate and say, and you end up going to the grocery store and buying way more stuff than you need to? Or is what you do, you just make sure that, hey, it's getting low, I'm going to the grocery store, buying what we need, put it in the fridge, and keep that level of food that you're comfortable with up?
That's exactly the latter description that you gave
Mm.
is really the approach that I take. So what's interesting about financial self-sabotage is, number one, you do need to recognize it. So for me, I used to do that overcompensation thing, especially in my 20s, when I hadn't really done the work around my money mindset yet. By the way, lots of therapy for that. But like, here we are, and I hadn't done all that work. So I used to do that overcompensation thing where I would go and fill the fridge so much so that I would have food waste.
Yeah.
And nowadays, because I've really understood that trigger, BT dubs, the holiday season in and of itself is a trigger for a lot of people. But when you understand the trigger, you then are able to actually take more thoughtful action. This means for me, I'm going to need to go shopping. And I think I'm going to do this on XYZ date. And I'm still going to go with a budget. I'm still going to go with intention, but helping understand your own triggers. Then if you've got deeply rooted issues around saving or overspending, you might need to get a little bit of support there from a money coach who maybe has a background in psychology, or from a psychologist who can help you unpack, like, where did this come from? And of course, if you and your spouse are locking horns on this stuff, like, maybe I'll give you an example. Maybe one of the spouses is a total cheapskate because that's how their parents were. Well, cheapskates and the holiday season, like, that doesn't go very well, and it can cause arguments. This is the kind of stuff you want to put on the table, understand what it is, understand what the triggers are, and then you work on practical solutions.
Okay, so you first have to decide. All right, I'm ready to work on this issue, and you get ready to identify those triggers. Now, you have a number of ideas for governing principles on breaking the financial self-sabotage pattern.
That's right. So financial self-sabotage, no surprise here, can creep up, but honestly, a little bit of awareness around the triggers is like 90% of the power required to stop the cycle. So just seeing it for what it is. But then your next step is actually to create some boundaries for yourself. No surprise here. This is very classical, rooted in positive money psychology. No, or having no boundaries is like a recipe for the cycle to continue, and it will go beyond the holidays into January. It will affect your mental health. But here's a couple of examples. These are decisions that you make where you say, you know what? I am going to do one or two things different this holiday season. Number one, no new debt. That could be your first idea. No new debt. The second idea, you could be the person who says, 24-hour rule, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to step away for 24 hours before I do anything, even grocery shopping, by the way. The other thing you could do is, let's say that you have a risk-taking approach to financial self-sabotage, and I'll be really practical here. These are folks who have maybe struggled with addictions or struggled with gambling or the lottery. Your decision, your conscious decision, would be: I am not going to step foot in any place where gambling or lotto could be played. And if addiction is part of your past, I am not going to step foot in, the liquor store or any of the cannabis shops. These are very conscious decisions. Tracking your spending each day is so, so helpful. Making sure that once you're aware of your triggers, you literally like stay away from the trigger. And people, by the way, they can be triggers. So let's say you have a parent who is, not a very supportive parent. You might need to set some distance, or a friend who is maybe a trigger for you. Go to therapy, book that session, especially if you've got benefits right now. As you're working with your therapist and unpacking this, like, take a look, like, what is driving these cycles of financial self-sabotage. I'll give you an example that's really prevalent If you grew up in a home where you really didn't have a lot and you justify your spending today as I deserve this, or basically justifying your risk taking because, well, hey, it's better than what my parents had. I want to call that one out specifically because it is a really damaging cycle. I know firsthand because I've been through it.
Yeah, yeah.
But really, I think the other thing is you could consciously say, I am going to get some support here. I am going to join a community. I'm going to just table all this stuff because I want something different. I want a different story.
Yeah. Well, and making a budget is something you always talk about, and joining a support community as well, and evaluating the risk every time you make a financial decision. Making financial wellness a priority is a process, and your state of mind drives up to 90% of the financial decisions we make. Very well written in the piece. Check out mevest.ca, personal finance expert. MeVest founder Hank and Dot's mom, Lesley-Anne Scorgi. Lesley-Anne, appreciated as always, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.